And welcome to Climate Chat. I'm your host, Dan Miller, and today we have a special guest, Alan Ransil of Devonian Systems. And our subject today is about biochar, which in some ways is a new subject and in some ways a very, very old subject as well. And we're going to learn about that as well and how biochar can be a significant climate solution for taking CO2 out of the atmosphere. But before we get started, I want to remind everyone to please like and subscribe, because the best way to spread this kind of information to the broader public. This kind of, as you all know, climate information is not actually covered much by the mainstream media. And both the problems and solutions aren't well known by the public. And you can do your part by helping spread this program. Again, like, subscribe, and also leave a comment as well. That also helps the algorithms. So Alan, welcome to Climate Chat, and maybe we could start off by just telling us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I guess my background is I've spent really my whole career working on climate from a materials point of view. So I started working on solar cells and batteries. I did my PhD at MIT in Angela Belcher's lab. And I worked some at Yetming Chang's lab for my master's, working on electronic materials and energy storage, because it's, if you think about the sort of pillars of addressing climate change, right? You have decarbonization, and then you have carbon removal, adaptation, and then people are talking about sort of a fourth pillar around interventions. For a long time, right? It's really that decarbonization piece that like correctly is, has been the main focus of efforts to address climate change. And as a materials engineer, I really saw sort of batteries being one of the main places we could contribute. And so I did that. I worked some on things like distributed power grid control systems at the MIT Energy Initiative. Worked at Protocol Labs on addressing the carbon impacts of distributed file storage, and then have shifted really recently into applying some of that electronic materials knowledge to control systems for biochar. And we can get a lot into biochar, but that's sort of our view into this, is that what's really going to unlock distributed biochar, or what's going to unlock biochar scaling, is really these distributed systems that integrate well into other industries.
Okay, well, all right. But before we get into biochar, my show last week was on what worried me about San Francisco Climate Week and sort of the optimism bias, techno-optimism, and all that kind of stuff. But one exception to that was the Stabilized Earth Summit or event that took place actually in the Internet Archives building, which was interesting. And that was something that you helped arrange, that particular program. Can you just maybe a minute or two on what got you to, you could have done just a program on biochar and what your company is doing, but instead you broadened it out to carbon removal in general and solar radiation management. And that was kind of the main focus of the conference. So what got you to do it that way?
Yeah. Well, as you know, and as people who watch this channel know, climate change has been accelerating, and carbon removal is an important part of the solution. We think it's going to be one of the most important industries of this century, but it's not going to get us through this period of several decades that could be really, really bad. And so, as we were thinking, sort of, like you said, what to do for SF Climate Week, and we're thinking about how do we not just do an event that is just kind of rah around our solution. We really, Caitlin, my co-founder, and I really wanted to, I don't know, just do something that felt more honest, right? And when you look at the best sort of possible projections for scaling a lot of carbon removal, you really have to get to gigatons a year of scale, which we're not at yet. And then you have to do that for decades, right? To take like order of magnitude 100 gigatons out of the atmosphere before you're really gonna
a lot more than that, but okay.
Yeah, or more than that. Yeah, sure. Well, it depends on sort of how many tenths of a degree you're looking at, right? But you really have to, I think people often working in carbon removal sort of like leave that part out, right? That we're directionally we're pushing in the right direction, right? But the timelines for really like genuinely having an impact are a while, right? And so I think, when it comes to all of these other interventions like solar radiation management, and there's a whole host of things that people are working on. I had thought that stuff was a little far out there until I read the Hansen paper just over a year ago. Climate change has accelerated our decision makers and the public well informed, something like that.
Mhm.
That showed this 0.4 degree C increase in temperatures over 2 years. And I understand there are caveats to that. Part of that was El Nino, about half of that was
Mhm.
El
Yeah.
Nino,
Yeah.
but 0.2 C of that was the result of removing sulfur from shipping emissions, and then the associated sensitivity to that increased temperatures a little bit, taking those sulfur aerosols out of the system, and then sensitivity to that slight temperature increase was higher than we expected, right, because of cloud formation largely. And that level of increase is just really, really scary, right? That's like an unacceptably huge rate of temperature increase.
That
And
should be how much it goes up in a decade.
yeah, exactly. Precisely.
Mhm.
And we're just not on track for the typical sort of like accepted pillars of dealing with climate change to get us to the world that we want to live in, right? And carbon removal is going to be an important part of the solution, but it's not going to help us in the next couple of decades very much. And so a friend of mine, Paul Gamble, has been sort of doing a lot of work in this area recently. I was talking to him about that, and we really kind of realized that many people are working on interventions that are sort of poised to help us address this problem, but they're in sort of disparate fields. They're not sort of in the mainstream of the climate conversation. And we wanted to do an event that had a lot of CDR people, a lot of carbon removal people talking honestly about what it takes to scale CDR, and showing people that there is still this gap, and that there are all these interventions that people are working on that could help us fill that gap. And so that's things like
Mhm.
solar radiation management, which includes stratospheric aerosol injection, includes things like sunshades right up in space that reflect some of the incoming sunlight. This is people are working on like Charlotte DeWalds is working on um, researching Arctic cloud thinning. So
Yeah,
there are
yeah.
all these right clouds that yeah, no, I know and
Well,
and
no, but I mean, the guests don't know. I mean, the audience doesn't know, but hopefully
right.
they'll learn. We're going to have a bunch of these folks on Climate Chat in the near future. So,
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's things like working on thinning clouds in the Arctic, that when it's bright, clouds are great. I mean, clouds are complicated, right? Clouds are extremely complicated. But to sort of a first order approximation, when it's sunny, clouds are great because they reflect sunlight, but when it's dark, clouds tend to
Mhm.
trap heat. And so
Right.
part of this sort of area of research is, can you thin clouds in the Arctic when it is not sunny, which it is not sunny for a lot of the year in the Arctic,
Mhm.
and then reduce the amount of heat that gets trapped by these mixed phase clouds. There are
Mhm.
people working on adding bubbles to the
I
ocean.
love the bubble one. We're going to definitely cover that
Bubbles are
soon.
great. Yeah, 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 yeah. Undercurrent and what they're doing is amazing with nanobubbles. They talk about it as like underwater clouds, which can
Yeah.
shade coral reefs. And so if a heat wave is coming, maybe you protect coral reefs by putting these long lasting bubbles into the ocean. Um, there are people working on using bubbles to reflect sunlight to lower the temperature of water that a hurricane is about to pass through, so
Yeah.
that you can actually like
That was
pull
very cool
energy
as
out of
well.
that hurricane. Right. There's people working on rewilding the Arctic to change the thermal insulation of snow cover over permafrost, so that you don't again trap as much heat. There's just people working on all of these different amazing things that really could be fast acting, right? Really
Mhm.
could help us get through the next few decades. And it's people, one, don't see those as necessary as they are, because I think even though we've been talking about urgency, right, and action around climate for forever, for decades, I think that the level of acceleration has not broken through to the sort of mainstream climate conversation, so people don't realize how necessary these interventions are. Secondly, people don't see all of these interventions as part of a single field, and so we're proposing, and other people have proposed, Earth stabilization as the sort of language that we should be using to talk about all these different types of interventions that could help, that sort of form a fourth pillar. And we thought that we could do this event to sort of tie those different pieces together.
Well, anyway, it was a great event, and I assume you got other people telling you the same thing afterwards, because it really was quite different than the normal stuff of, hey, look at all this, renewable energy stuff, and look how fast it's growing, or I don't know. There was a lot. That was last week's show, so we'll
Well,
move on. But
the other thing there is that people who are well informed, I think, often, I have this kind of like sinking feeling in my heart, right, when I go to one of these talks where people are glossing over how dire the situation really is, and how the actions that they are talking about are not going to address that situation in time, right? And everyone claps and applauds and says, we're doing a great job, I'm so optimistic, right? And I have this like sinking feeling of you're just like not representing this correctly. And so I think that, that has been part of the feedback that we've gotten, is that addressing these issues in sort of a more realistic way, and pointing out the danger, but also pointing out that there are all of these things that we haven't put a lot of resources into that could really help, I think does help people be more optimistic, and sort of ideally we want to catalyze more resources to come into this field and this set of fields to help deal with climate.
I think it's a good point, because I sometimes go to these talks, and then some major person saying something, and you realize they really don't get how serious the situation is, and then you walk away going, I guess this is why we're all going to die, because people like this don't get it. But then at your conference, it's funny, because in some sense you were willing to take on how scary the situation is more honestly than the others. But at the same time, I think you go to your event and you walk out with much more hope and much more optimism, because, first of all, people are taking it seriously and understand the threat properly, because if you don't understand the threat, what are you going to do, right? But then you see, wow, look at all these different solutions out there. Maybe they're not all going to work, but there's so many in here that, and you walk out with really a better feeling than you do walking out of these, quote, optimistic presentations that you see at the rest of Climate Week. But anyway, we did the whole show on that last week. I want to leave time for biochar, because biochar, so I've been giving climate talks for over 20 years. And the first climate solution I learned about was biochar. And it sounded great. It was something that had positive side effects as opposed to negative side effects. I mean, obviously you're getting the CO2 out of the atmosphere, but then it also helps the soils and extra energy, and I mean all these things, and oils and things. But that was like over 20 years ago. And while as a venture capitalist, I've seen biochar companies come and go, by the way, along the way. But it's never really caught on as a major climate solution yet. But it has a lot of history, which we'll get into. But why don't we start off, because not everyone knows even what biochar is. So maybe we can start off with, what is biochar and why is it a possible carbon removal solution?
Yeah. So biochar is what happens when you take biomass and heat it without burning it all the way. And so, the stuff left over in a campfire, like not the ash, right? The ash tends to be gray, but the like charcoal looking stuff that's left over, like that's biochar. So basically everyone is familiar with this at least a little bit. Or like, if you put your toast in the toaster too long, you're right, and it starts, it turns black, right? You've essentially just made very sort of uncontrolled low temperature biochar. And so the what's great about that is you can take all of these different types of materials and turn them into this carbonized kind of, as you said, material that has all these great benefits to it when you say mix it into the soil, or when you use it as an additive in different types of industries. And what that means is that, if you think of the normal carbon cycle, typically the biogenic carbon cycle, plants grow in the wild or in agriculture. They pull a bunch of CO2 in from the atmosphere to grow, and then they decompose, and generally on a, depending on what plants you're looking at, on a 5 years to decades timescale, and that CO2 goes back into the atmosphere. And in order for biochar to be a carbon removal solution, you basically have to take the piece where that CO2 goes back into the atmosphere and just kind of cut it off. What's great about biochar is that especially when you heat it to high temperatures, you end up with this very durable, inert material that bacteria and fungi have trouble breaking down. So you're changing the chemical structure of the biochar. So you have these condensed aromatic rings, or like if you think of like graphite, right? Like if you have sort of if you from organic chemistry, right, you have this picture of graphite being these condensed hexagonal rings that just kind of like tessellate out in these sheets. Those are very, very durable. And we can talk about sort of studies on that and how people measure that durability. And there's been a lot of work on that in the past couple of years. And that's one of the things that sort of unlocked confidence in this
what do you think the sort of the answer is? Like, how long will properly made biochar last as carbon and not return as CO2 into the atmosphere? What decades, centuries, millennia? What kind of time frame?
Yeah, it's millennia. So there are a lot of caveats to this, and it is people have been trying to measure this in many different ways for a long time. And the fact that you are starting with this biological material and turning it into a geological material means it's like a little heterogeneous, right? And there's kind of different phases, and that's what makes it difficult to like do these short experiments and then extrapolate those for,
right. Yeah, to wait 1,000
right?
years to find out whether it worked or not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's kind of the crux of it. But some of the best research on this really pulls from it's weird to be in climate and be taking like research from the fossil fuel industry, but that's, this is like a lot of this work comes back to 19th century research on coal, right?
But it essentially is coal, right? I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
Created, by the way, I for just in terminology, so wood turned into biochar is often called charcoal. And so we all know what charcoal is, just like little carbon bricks you put in your barbecue to cook things. And also, but one other point you didn't mention, but my understanding is the way you make biochar is you heat something without the presence of oxygen. So it doesn't have a chance to burn into CO2, but instead just turns into C. Is that, I mean, maybe oversimplifying a bit, but
exactly.
That's my understanding. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
that's called pyrolysis.
Yeah.
Is the name of the technique. And how long has that been going on? How long have humans been making biochar?
People have been making biochar for at least thousands of years. And there are, for example, these plots of land called terra preta in the Amazon, where people, in sort of ancient times, right, put waste and charcoal into these plots of land. And the soil there looks different. Like soil in the Amazon typically has this red color, right? If you've seen like deforested patches of land in the Amazon, like pictures of those, they have this like, it looks like Mars almost, right? They have this, they don't have a lot of nutrients. It's being kind of leached out of the soil by centuries, millennia of growth. And the terra preta plots are darker. Like you can see the carbon in them. You can see the organic nutrients in them, because biochar helps break down organic nutrients into bioavailable plant matter. And those plots of land are known to be great for growing crops. They're more fertile. This is reflected in the land value. People sell terra preta plots of land for several times what typical plots of land go for. And so yeah, this has been known to be a something this has been known to benefit agriculture, right, for thousands of years. Our company is called Devonian Systems because it was during the Devonian era, roughly 400 million years ago, that plants evolved the ability to make these hard sort of lignin rich tissues that are the trunks of trees. And so in the Devonian era, plants invented trees then invented coal. They got buried underground and led to coal deposits for the first time. And that coal, that carbon removal, pulled huge amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere and lowered global temperatures. So that's how we think of this. Is it's it's a millions year old sort of geological technology for regulating the CO2 in the atmosphere.
Okay, so the basic operation is you take waste biomass, could be wood chips, could be things left over from agriculture, could be all kinds of things, and you put it in a special oven that heats this without oxygen. And we're going to learn about what you're doing specifically on that. And then it turns into biochar, which you can then spread on agriculture land, and I'd like to hear what else you can do with it. And it helps improve. It's not a fertilizer, but it helps retain water and makes the soil healthier. But it's not really a fertilizer per se. And because it's went from CO2 in the atmosphere to a plant to now a solid form of carbon, that CO2 is now permanently removed from the atmosphere. There were some questions, by the way, in like on Twitter and stuff before the show, saying that some people didn't think it was permanent. So maybe, well, you mentioned you're saying basically if it's done right, it can be permanent. Can you maybe talk a little bit more on that?
Yeah, exactly. And a big innovation in the past couple of years has been to take work from coal that people have been studying for 150 plus years and apply that to characterizing biochar, because we have these deposits of coal that we know have been in the upper crust for millions of years. Mm-hmm. And if they were degrading on the timescales that people are proposing biochar degrades, then you just wouldn't find those deposits.
Well, I don't think it's that, because you can just take unburned wood and put it 10 feet down, and as long as you keep the oxygen away, it will stay. It won't degrade for a long time. And that is another carbon solution, by the way, is just burying trees, at the right depth where you keep the oxygen away.
It's true.
So I don't think that would be for coal. I think we're talking about if you spread it on the surface and it's part of the soil.
Yeah,
well, that's a different situation, right?
So the timescales matter a lot. And so these coal deposits would degrade over this tens of millions of year timescale if even tiny amounts of oxygen could degrade them, right? And so this is a point that Hamid Sineh, who we do some work with from Aarhus University, makes, that he studies organic petrology, so he studies coal, carbon-based materials in the geosphere, right? The geosphere and the biosphere are interconnected. And what he points out is that if you want to do a good job of understanding these very durable carbon-based materials, what you should do is you should take techniques from organic petrology, from studying these organic geological materials, and apply those to studying biochar. And the best measurement of durability in coal, in these carbonaceous geological materials, is called random reflectance. And so that's, you take this coal material, you polish it, you put it under a microscope, you choose a bunch of random points in that sample with an optical microscope, and you see how reflective it is. Mm-hmm. And the metric there is that if it's more reflective, then it's more like graphite, right? It has these more sort of graphitic domains, which are very, very difficult for microorganisms to break down, because you have these, from organic chemistry, you have these more energetically stable carbon-carbon double bonds are what's found in those like hexagonal rings. Mm-hmm. And that's much easier, or much more difficult for bacteria to degrade than these single carbon-carbon bonds. And so the idea is that this is a measurement of the material itself, right? How similar is this to these materials that we know take millions of years to degrade? And that should be sort of the baseline measurement that people use when they're trying to get a good measurement of durability.
Okay, so let's take it. It's going to last a long time, but there's other things. So again, I'm not an expert on biochar, but I understand that from before, one of the issues about scaling biochar for use for agriculture, there were contaminants in biochar, and that made it, maybe we shouldn't use it on this field or something. Could you talk a little bit how that's being addressed now?
Yeah, so one of the main contaminants is polyaromatic hydrocarbons, and those can be, if you have too many, and you don't want to never inhale smoke, right? This is a good kind of rule of thumb. You generally don't want to like eat or breathe things that are burning in an uncontrolled way. Um, but the idea here is that if you are pyrolyzing material at 300 degrees or 400 degrees or 500 degrees, you're going to get like some of these contaminants, right? That are and have in the past been sort of an issue for less controlled biochar production. When you
Okay.
go up to 700 degrees Celsius or even 600 degrees Celsius, and this is sort of the temperature range that our pyrolyzers and a lot of the other sort of more controlled ones operate at. This is sort of
Hmm.
600 to 900 degrees Celsius range. You break down those polyaromatic hydrocarbons. You also break down things like forever chemicals like PFAS
Oh,
and
okay.
organic pesticides. There are all sorts of contaminants that can be in these organic residues that when you
Mm.
go up above about 450 degrees Celsius, you burn those away. And so we are burning this stuff. We are heating this stuff in a low oxygen environment. It's not a zero oxygen environment.
Okay.
So you start with this this biological material that has some lignin and some cellulose that can be converted to highly durable char, but it also has things like sugars, right, and
Hmm.
fats and
Oh,
like
yeah,
all
right.
of this other stuff, right, that is part of that biological material, but you end up burning away. So first it pyrolyzes, generally it turns into smoke essentially. That
Hmm.
smoke has a lot of flammable components to it. And what you can do in a biochar kiln is rather than continuously putting energy in to keep this at a high temperature, you burn part of the carbon in that material that
Right.
keeps your kiln at a high temperature, and you have this uh, uh, that you can run your kiln with only very minimal energy input, and
Right.
you can produce biochar and even use that to generate electricity. And so the the real key there is good control over the temperature and residence time, and that's what lets you get rid of a lot of those PAHs. I think the
Mm.
reputation that biochar was prone to having contaminants really came from some earlier studies and earlier work that people did where they weren't controlling that temperature very well.
By the way, you made some very important subject, energy, and a lot of people, well, very well, you're running this thing, it takes a lot of energy. But my understanding is on most, I thought it was even all of the energy actually comes from the biomass itself. And as you said, you can generate electricity. I mean, you could be doing a lot of things at the same time. Uh, Generate energy, run the biochar. It sounds like you're putting some energy in as well to get the thing up to temperature first.
Yeah. Yeah, generally you preheat it and then it produces more energy than it consumes.
Okay, so that take that's and if you do generate energy from it, it's sort of carbon negative energy, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So all right, okay. Um, so one question I have is what percent? So I have a tree or whatever it is, I have biomass. What percent of, and we were just talking about there's sugars and all these other things. What percent of the tree is converted to biochar, and how much is left over?
Yeah, it's about half.
About half. Now I've heard much lower, but is it maybe at the higher
Maybe.
temperatures or
Yeah,
something?
exactly. Yeah. So generally there's a trade-off where when you go up to higher temperatures, you get a higher fraction of like very, very durable biochar. And it's also you there are a lot of reasons you want to tune this temperature depending on what the end use of that biochar is. But generally, if you go up to higher temperatures, you get a bit lower yield. And so, maybe it goes down to 35 or 40%
Mm-hmm.
of like very durable biochar.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to go up to this like 900 degree Celsius number in order to get a high fraction of inertinite,
But what
which is
happens?
this like
Okay,
very durable stuff. Yeah,
what happens to the other half?
yeah. So it gets burned. So
Oh, I
that's
see. So that's it's going. I see. So it's not left behind. What's left behind is almost all biochar.
yeah, yeah, exactly. There's some ash and stuff too, but it's
Ash.
what you get out of it is essentially all biochar. There's also, I mean, this if you can tune your process to do different things, right? And so some people are tuning their process to try and produce as much bio oil as possible. So that's a lot of these PAHs and other types of compounds. Like that oil can be useful, and that can be carbon that you can sequester from this process if you don't burn it, and then injected underground or something to store it for a long time, and there are folks working on that. But in general, like the way that we run our kilns, we want to optimize for as much durable biochar as possible, and so
Mhm.
that's in
Okay.
the sort of like 45 to 50% yield range.
All right. By the way, maybe we should get the picture of one of your kilns up on the screen later, and
Yeah,
because it just lets show people it's not a big scary thing. It looks like a garbage dumpster kind of thing. Is in
a
a
lot of
sense
them
what
do.
it is, I guess, with some extra things going on there. So so as I said, biochar has been around well for thousands of years, but as a climate solution, it's been around for over 20 years, and yet it hasn't really scaled up. What do you think some of the reasons it hasn't scaled up yet, and then what is your company trying to do to change that?
Yeah. We think a lot about this because this is really the name of the game when you want to have impact in climate, right? Is like why what are the different avenues available to you, right? Ultimately, like we need to be pulling more resources into carbon removal to build it up into this large, multi-gigaton a year industry by the middle of the century. And so we think about this as, what are the different reasons that what are the different driving forces or forcing functions that are going to go into scaling a CDR solution? And the reason we work on biochar is that there are at least three forcing functions to increase the amount of biochar produced. So one is carbon markets, and that's and I'll come back to this. I'll answer your question by talking about sort of like what's holding back each of these forcing functions, right? So one are carbon markets. So this is both the voluntary carbon market, which gets a lot of attention. So that's Microsoft and Google and JP Morgan and like all of these companies buying credits to meet their carbon targets. But
Mhm.
that's also compliance markets. And the biggest one that may accept biochar carbon removal in a few years is the EU ETS. This
Oh,
is like an absolutely huge compliance market. I think the trading volume it's like almost $1 trillion, right? It's like 900
and
something billion.
it's in the range of $100. I don't remember what it is now, but I mean,
Yeah, the
in
price
that
has
order of
fluctuated, but
magnitude
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
per
it's like
ton of
70 something
CO2
euros.
sequestered. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's cheaper than biochar carbon credits tend to go at the like 150 to 180
Really, that
USD per
much?
ton. Yeah,
Wow.
in on the voluntary markets. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Huh.
But and so
Okay.
so yeah, the ETS is a bit cheaper, but it's
No,
the
no, I
carbon
meant,
price is
but
higher than
what's the let's talk about maybe a very important point. What is the cost
yeah.
of generating a ton of CO2 sequestration using biochar? Like
Yeah.
order of magnitude.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so what we really focus on is making biochar integrate well with other people's industries that produce biomass, right? And so
Right.
that depends a lot on what you assume about labor costs and like the details of how you integrate with someone else's operations.
Yeah,
And
how you get the because I mean, one of the problems I understand in the past was you build a kiln somewhere, you have a nice little factory there to do it,
yeah,
and now you have to truck in biomass, and
yeah,
you're basically trucking in waste products to a central facility. Now, with your system, it's very small, and you bring it to where the biomass is. Is that right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, we think that we think one of the main ways carbon removal scales is biochar, and we think the way biochar scales is by making biochar equipment that just becomes as ubiquitous as a wood chipper. So we
Mhm.
want this to become the default way that people deal with biomass, and the way that you make that easy is you have a machine that sort of meets user needs that they can tow around to wherever they have biomass, and then, just like you said, you don't have these aggregation costs, you don't have these transportation costs. You can just turn biomass into biochar wherever you are,
Mhm.
and that's how you unlock these like massive quantities of feedstock. And
Okay.
and so we can go back I'll just tell you kind of like the three different ways that biochar can scale, right? The three like driving forces in scaling biochar, and we can kind of like go through those and talk about like why haven't they scaled yet. So one is carbon markets, then a second is waste management, and a third is selling that biochar as a useful product in all these different industries. And so the reason that carbon markets haven't scaled biochar yet is that they only sort of recently existed. And when you look at voluntary carbon market, like durable removals, what you really see is that biochar is a relatively low percent of all of the carbon credits sold. So it's roughly 6% of all
Okay.
of the sales. But many of those sales are for credits that don't exist yet. So this is like Microsoft signs a 15-year contract with someone who's going to set up a giant facility where they're, pumping carbon underground and doing like CCS or something, right?
Okay.
And so the headline number there is huge, right? Because this facility is planned to be giant,
Mhm.
but they're also like most of those credits are relatively far in the future, right? And so
Right.
those numbers kind of like dominate this durable removals market. What biochar really stands out for is for people who are actually making an impact on the ground, biochar totally dominates. So it's like 80 or 90% of actually delivered CDR. And so
All
I
right,
think that like, yep,
I'm picking there. There we go. There's
yep. Yeah, exactly. So that's our system is the this this device here that's about 6 feet high. It's a little more than that. And you put biomass into it, and it's designed to be, like it says here, self-driving. So the idea is that you um we think that the reason that biochar is going to scale is that it becomes very easy to integrate into other people's operations. And so this might be wood chippers. There are people all over the place driving around with trucks full of wood chips because they just did a tree removal or a tree trimming job, and they are looking for somewhere to put those wood chips. They put a bunch of their time and effort and money into getting rid of the biomass that they generated. And that's true all over this country. Um,
Mhm.
Other places are agricultural operations. So people are uh, things like shells from walnuts or almonds.
Mhm.
We've also talked to folks doing things like recycling pallets. There's this giant
Right.
industry for taking pallets that people use to ship products to stores, and then
The worn
taking in
out
those
ones.
pallets, refurbishing them. So
Yeah.
yeah, refurbishing them and then shipping them back out. Right. There are all of these different places where people generate large amounts of biomass, and right now they dispose of that biomass by chipping it into mulch, composting it, or just literally burning it. So like pile burn. Um, also, as people are dealing with wildfires, and
Mm.
governments are trying to scale up operations to combat wildfires, fuel reduction operations where people are taking these ladder fuels, these like small and medium sized trees and bushes, and going out and getting rid of them. They don't have a lot of great options now other than just pile burning all of that biomass.
Or
And
that
so
you could just drop this off nearby. How much
yeah,
can that unit right there do? How many
yeah,
like trees per day or whatever the unit you want? I guess it's tons, but
yeah. Yeah, this is a ton of biomass a day, and we're working on our next generation is going to be 10 tons a day.
and
And we've
how much does a tree weigh? A typical
yeah.
burnt tree in a forest.
Yeah, I think that
A
when you
couple.
are thinking about these fuel reduction operations, you should really be thinking about sort of like small diameter trees, right? So these they're not going and chopping like really big trees, right? They're trying to get rid of these ladder
Oh,
fuels.
the fuel trees. No,
Yeah.
I was thinking post fire, getting
Oh,
rid of
yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Post
yeah,
fire.
no, you're right.
Yeah,
Pre-fire, you want the small stuff. Absolutely, yeah.
yeah. It depends. I mean, so what we really think about it in terms of is the biomass generated by an individual operation that we're going to integrate with. And so
Mhm.
there are a bunch of composters who generate a bunch of biomass waste, right? They process biomass waste, but also they can't deal with all of the waste that comes in, right? And so often 20 to 40% of the waste that comes in, they actually have to pay to dispose of themselves.
Oh,
And there are many compost operations that generate, you know 20-30 tons a day, something like that.
okay.
And then there are, many just like local tree trimmers, right? Will also,
Mhm.
they'll have several truckloads that are each a couple tons a day. And so we really think this 10-ton a day number is
Mhm.
sort of the happy medium where you're able to address the needs of a small tree trimmer with a single device. Or if you have a larger compost facility, you just line several of these pyrolysis reactors
And
up.
that's still gonna be mobile. You can still
Yeah.
put it on a truck and move it around at 10 tons a day.
Exactly. Yeah. 10 tons a day of feedstock capacity. The reactor itself doesn't weigh 10 tons. You should think of it
All
as
right.
being like a medium-sized U-Haul is kind of the
Okay.
scale, and you just drive them around. And then also, what you're able to do there is reduce aggregation and transportation costs, and then you're also able to scale production capacity
Mhm.
as your feedstock scales. And so this is
Mhm.
really important in agricultural operations, right? Where they, almond shellers will shell their product right in September, right? And so they're not consistently producing this all year round, right? They have like a
Mhm.
huge need for this in the fall, and then no need for it in the spring. And so the right solution to that is to have this fleet of reactors that are just constantly sort of on the move, searching for biomass, and are easy to integrate with these operations.
Searching for biomass, I
They
guess.
are, yeah. We think of
Well,
them as
let's
biomass,
talk
but
about biomass because one
yeah,
of the big constraints of biochar when I first learned about it, again, this is 20 years ago, was that the total waste biomass available for biochar, which was going to be competing with all these other uses for biomass that everyone was coming up with at the time, um, was limited. If I remember correctly, it was something like 1.6 gigatons, and I think it was a global number. Now, that's been updated a lot since then, and you have some more recent research on that. So, can you tell us about? Hey, this thing is scaling. We're doing great. What's the maximum theoretical amount of CO2 sequestration we could do using biochar
yeah,
if we dedicated all the biomass to that?
yeah. The A conservative number is about 2 gigatons a year of carbon removal from biochar. So that's accounting for losses. And there's
So it has
a
to be at least four. That you said 50% is biochar. So
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So roughly a little more than 4 gigatons of biomass a year. And that's global. That's from 155, I believe, countries. This see, I have
and so it's a
paper here.
lot more
Yep.
biomass than that then too, because I understand the number was like 10 in the order of 10 gigatons of waste
Yeah.
biomass available, and then you're saying you look at what you could really do and all that kind of stuff, you get down to 2. Okay.
Yeah, well, so those are from different sources. So the two number, the like, it's like 1.99 across when you add up when you go to their supplementary
I'm sure
information.
it's known
Yeah,
that accurately, sure.
yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, um, the so that's a more conservative estimate, looking at like going into databases of biomass produced by these different industries and using that as a starting point. And so that is waste from industries that is known to be available for processing, and they made assumptions for each of these different industries around like how much could you actually like realistically use, and they come up with this 1.99 number. And that's from the Traveled group, and I could send you this paper
Okay.
if that's interesting. When you make so the like in oil and gas exploration, right? There's like economically extractable reserves, and then there's total reserves, right? And these are very different numbers, and the difference is how good is your technology at accessing everything that's physically possible. If you wanted more of an idea of what's the upper limit, it's gonna be higher than that 2 gigatons a year capacity. So for example, there's a modeling paper from the Liu group at Cornell, where they looked at just managed forests. So this is the logging and timber industry, and they looked at the sustainable amount of biomass that could be produced by managed forests all over the world, using like not experimental data mainly, but they used several different models, and they're sort of the go-to group that understands sort of models of terrestrial carbon really, really well. What they found was that there was about 16 gigatons of sustainably harvestable biomass per year, just from this one segment, and that they were looking at biomass burial in this paper, but they said it was about 10 to 12 gigatons um, of biomass, or of carbon removal impact if you took all of that and buried it. And so The reason I think that's great, right? I think people should be working on these projects, and definitely it is true that biochar is less efficient at taking that 16 gigatons of biomass and transforming that into removed carbon than biomass burial is, because with biomass burial you just take all of that carbon and bury
100%.
it, and depending on what assumptions you make about degradation. um the reason that we think the reason that we work on biochar is that you have all of these different forcing functions that could lead to it scaling. So, like I said, you have carbon markets, which are available for biomass burial and all of these different types of carbon removal. Then you also have waste management, and you also have selling biochar for use as a product.
Right. What
And
helps agriculture.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it helps agriculture. People are using it in cement as an
Okay.
additive to make that cement stronger and more carbon negative. And people are using it as a wastewater management tool, so dealing with storm
Filter.
runoff
Carbon
and
filters, basically.
yeah, exactly. Carbon filters for even like putting it just on the side of a road. So
Oh,
runoff from that road, then the biochar is essentially biochar and activated carbon are very, very similar, right? Are
right.
essentially the same. The difference is really the standard that you apply to them. So activated carbon is generally a little more controlled than with biochar. You're taking a bunch of biomass and processing it and really trying to maximize the throughput. But we think that the thing that is going to make biochar scale is integration with all of these different industries. And in order to do that, you need to increase the consistency of biochar production. And like I said, we think of this as a bunch of robots that are traveling the country and the globe looking for biomass. If they are trying to make the best biochar that they can because they want to integrate really well with all these other industries, they need a control signal that lets them sort of optimize their operations to produce really high quality, really good biochar. The One of the things that is missing in this industry is a signal that actually lets you optimize your operation like on the ground. Typically when people do I described how random reflectance works, right? You take this sample, you cast it in a resin that takes at least a day, then you polish that, and then you put it under a microscope and you look at all these different data points. The other thing that people do is elemental analysis. So they look at the hydrogen to carbon ratio. And that's also this destructive measurement that generally takes a couple weeks for people to do in a lab. You like send your sample off and they do it and get back to you. If it takes 2 weeks to figure out how good your biochar is, but your input feedstock is potentially changing on like an hour's timescale,
Right.
right? Like that's not a great control system. And so people typically optimize these furnaces by just looking at their throughput and their temperature and how much exhaust they're getting out and all of these very indirect proxies for how good their biochar is. And so one of the things that we did at Devonian is we built on work I did in grad school looking at the electronic properties of materials and looked in the literature on characterizing biochar and saw that the electrical conductivity is the best correlated measurement. It's sort of known in organic petrology studies to be well correlated with random reflectance, which is this measurement of biochar quality. But with electronic conductivity, you can just use a probe, so like a 4-point probe, and you can measure the conductance, the electrical conductivity of biochar, just like
Hmm.
right away. You just take this probe and stick it on the biochar sample, and it gives you this reading because it's just forcing electrons through and measuring the voltage,
Right.
right? It's this instantaneous measurement, and so that's our sort of part of the core of what we're doing differently from what other folks are doing is that we have this control signal available that can let us optimize these kilns in the field. And so we really think that like that is, as you think about you think about like what does the ability to get a very sort of like consistent biochar, what does that unlock for you? And you can think about those three different verticals, right? In carbon markets, what that lets you do is optimize your biochar for durability in the field, sort of on the fly, and issue really high quality credits.
Hmm.
Then in waste management, that lets you understand as you're processing this biomass, lets you understand if I'm trying to optimize my kiln for waste management, when am I like pushing it too hard? When am I going too far? Like, what exactly is that line? So I can really I can optimize my process as much as I possibly can. And then it's really clear if you are selling that biochar for cement or as a soil amendment, or as a like water filtration material, right? You care a lot about the properties of that output biochar. And if you have this control signal that you can measure every few minutes or every few seconds, then that lets you optimize your kiln to produce the highest quality product that you possibly can.
So my understanding, so the advantages of your system versus older ones, first is the portability. But to be honest with you, I've seen portable systems proposed long ago, because the idea that, hey, instead of taking the biomass to the kiln, let's bring the kiln to the biomass has been thought about for a long time. Maybe some people doing it more better than others. But one is its portability. And the second thing you're saying is that to really, to understand biochar, you need to send it away for a lab. It takes a couple of weeks, and therefore, that just makes the whole thing very inefficient. And now you have this new way using electrical measurements to understand the biochar instantaneously, and that lets you optimize everything. So those are two advantages your system has. Any other like major advantages versus the competition out there?
Yeah, I mean, so even these mobile systems, which, as you've said, have been proposed for a long time and do sort of exist, they are often hard to use, and it's really that optimization, so that you want this control system that acts as sort of your infield chemical engineer, right? And so
Or you
you
just
don't
dump
need
the
to.
stuff in and don't worry about it. Just like hit the
Exactly.
on button, and that's it.
Yeah, you
Or
hit
the
the
other
on
ones, you have
button.
all these dials and everything, and you got to know what you're doing.
Exactly. Yeah. You hit the on button and you feed material and it does a really good job of understanding how do I produce really good quality biochar, right? You think of it as the biochar robot that just like really wants deep in its soul to produce the best biochar possible. And like now it actually has the information it needs to get that done.
Cool. So, what else do you know? But in the industry, what else is like exciting to you about maybe what other companies are doing? Like, to move us towards this reality of not just this great demonstration system or small scale carbon removal, but moving into the gigaton scale with what you're doing. Are there's things happening elsewhere in the industry that you think are exciting?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of really good work going on. Eximad Green is exciting because they have a centralized facility, but they're pushing to really high amounts of biochar that they're producing, and so they're sort of they've been leading the way on really pushing to very very high scale. I think like the work that Takachar and Applied Carbon have been doing is really exciting because they've been pushing the envelope on sort of ability to integrate with agricultural operations. Pacific Biochar has been doing great work for a long time, integrating especially with the logging and timber industries in Northern California. I think what Carba is doing in Colorado, so they are working with forestry, like the Forest Service. Charm and Carba actually both are working with the Forest Service to take this timber, this like non-saleable timber from logging operations, and turn it into char that then you are combating wildfire by helping the Forest Service like find something to do that's not a pile burn with that timber coming out of the mountains. And then because you're removing carbon, you're also hopefully contributing to decreasing wildfire intensity and frequency in the future. So yeah, there's a lot of it's a very sort of vibrant industry, and I think that the voluntary carbon market, in your question about why hasn't it scaled to sort of the scale that we need, I think like part of that is or an articulation of that is like, is biochar ready for prime time? I think it's readier for prime time than a lot of other technologies, and you can see that
Okay.
because it's most of the delivered durable carbon
How
removal.
much, by the way, I didn't even ask the question, but what would you estimate last year was, or, how
Yeah.
many gigatons of biochar or CO2 removed from using biochar is already being achieved?
Yeah. Yeah. So I believe 1 megaton has already been delivered, and that milestone was passed that's not per year, that's like total. And that was
Total.
passed in December. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
We
it
got
was
a
total,
while to
but
go.
it's also predominantly in the past year. It's well, I don't want to say predominantly, but it's it's accelerating, right?
But the cost. So, by the way, my thought on CDR, because I'm also
Yeah.
been involved in different kinds of carbon capture systems and things like that for a long time. People say, well, it doesn't work, it hasn't scaled. It's very simple. You pay for it, you can have as much as you want. Like, it's not a limit. I mean, and even if the technology isn't ready for that scale yet, you're willing to pay for it, it will scale to that level quickly. And I think biochar is an example, and all of the other ones are examples. I mean, there might be a few that aren't really very good or something that they'll fall by the wayside. But if governments decide that we need to remove 10 gigatons a year and they're willing to pay for it, you can have as much as you want. You want 20? Fine. I actually think we need 40 gigatons, by the way. That's the number I think we need, because you talked about the time frame for lowering atmospheric CO2. But speaking of all of that, maybe get back to the last question, really, and then we'll go on to questions from others. The cost per ton, I didn't really quite, and also you get benefits. So you're producing a product that's valuable, so that can offset the cost. But what's the range, maybe across many systems, not just yours, for producing biochar? Is it $100 a ton? Is it $200 a ton? Or
No, it's definitely less than 200. It depends entirely on what assumptions you make about where the labor cost is coming from,
and whether the waste is right there and you just dump it in.
And we see a path. I was talking about getting biochar machines to be as ubiquitous as wood chippers, right? Like, no one says, like, okay, this only works because of the voluntary market for wood chips, right? Like that's not the thing that's limiting wood chip production. And it's because of these co-benefits. You can think of people in carbon markets think of co-benefits as this sort of side thing, but in the broader world, right, co-benefits are just like the reason things happen, right? Like, you don't drive your car because of the carbon impact. You drive your car because it gets you, because of the co-benefit, right? It like gets you somewhere. And so we really think that these these like side benefits, these co-benefits, the effects on operations that are not carbon are like really, really key to scaling at least biochar, right? And so there are, we do see a pathway to making biochar equipment that people buy and use because waste disposal costs are high. And that's something we haven't really gone into. But if you look at average tipping fees in the US for waste disposal, those are increasing at something like 3 times inflation. And so there's
I can see that's being really big for that. I mean,
so there are all these different folks who are producing biomass and paying to get rid of that biomass. And part of the question in our mind is, how do you make biochar the easiest way and most cost-effective way for them to do that? Where part of that equation is just cost savings, because you start with wet biomass, you turn it into biochar, you're removing about half the carbon, right? So that's a weight decrease. Also, about a third of that wet biomass, depending on what it is water, right? So you're getting rid of that. So then you end up with this valuable product that weighs something like a third of what you needed to dispose of, right? And then you can you can use that in your operation if you're a composter or a landscaper, or you can sell that to a farmer. Your back office doesn't have to spend a bunch of time as they do now. They spend most of their morning just figuring out where the wood chip's going to go, right? So there are all these benefits potentially to integrating biochar into different types of operations. We're not there yet, right? Like, we don't have machines that are easy enough to use for just any sort of random person running a wood chipper to do biochar instead. But we think that in the medium term, we can get to a place where biochar just becomes the default way that people get rid of biomass, and like then you have potentially very large scale carbon removal.
Wow, fascinating. It's kind of weird that something like biochar is such a fascinating subject, and again, something that really interests me. 20 years ago when I heard about it, I said, wow, this is a great thing, and it is still fascinating. Let's bring in, let's see, let me get up here and get Stacy. Stacy, are you ready to go? There you are. Okay. Hey, Stacy, welcome. Oh, we have
Hi.
to see the cats. Oh, wait.
No, they're not here.
No.
And I even did the I don't know, maybe they'll come. I don't
Okay.
know. They're napping in the front window, which is
Okay.
unusual. But
Okay. Anyway,
thank
Nice.
thanks for being here, Alan. Oh my gosh, I am so sorry that I missed Stabilize Earth. Please put me on the list for next year. It sounds kind of like it would be very therapeutic versus the light torture of other sessions.
Yeah,
Um,
100%.
I
We're gonna have
I
the
yeah.
recordings up too. I'll let you know when those are
Yeah, I mean,
going up.
because I'm right here. So anytime you guys are doing something locally, please let me know.
We'll do.
Um, the the question I had was, did I hear this right about, well, first of all, I should say, everyone, reminder, like and subscribe. We need the help in getting the word out. And this is a really good word to get out. And I have to mention our friend Albert Bates, who is the guy who told me about biomass for the
mhm.
first time here on Climate Chat, probably 5 years ago now. And I was like, what? Wait, why aren't we doing this everywhere? This is amazing. And he was talking about all the different ways you could use it and that you could use everything from, nutshells and trees and whatever to poop. Like, are you able to use any bio input for with your magic kilns?
Yeah, this is good. I know people that are optimizing kilns for using poop or using actually there's a waste from farms is like a huge area, both for char and also for like methane abatement.
Mm-hmm.
But our kilns aren't optimized use like poop or any sort of like sewage sludge. The consider it like the amount of moisture matters a lot in sort of running them efficiently, and so it's just like kind of thermodynamically this different regime. And you
Yep.
really need to sort of dry it and pelletize it first. But yeah, I mean, it's totally it's a the thing people are working on that could move into.
It almost seems like it would be like a an add-on or something because you're producing so much energy from the burn
Yeah.
that you could use that to dry um, the
Yeah.
stuff. But
This is
um,
also there's it's kind of wild, the sewage sludge thing. People people don't love like thinking about this or talking about this very much, but it's actually like used in agriculture quite a bit, and there are companies that take like sewage sludge from like cities and then kind of treat it and then sell it to farms because it has a lot of nitrogen. It's like good fertilizer. One of the really major issues is PFAS contamination in sewage sludge, and that can get into agriculture, right? And then people are consuming PFAS. And that's PFAS is these forever chemicals that are
right.
fluorinated
But
that are
you said your temp 700 plus
yeah.
neutralizes that?
Yeah, so that's actually that is the reason that some people are getting into biochar. Like that is some farmers want to use sewage sludge. They know it really increases their nutrient profile or it improves their nutrient profile, and they don't want to have to worry about PFAS, and so they are buying dryers and pelletizers and biochar production equipment and using that to just get rid of the PFAS. So that actually is one of the driving factors in this.
Excellent. And so you were saying the electrical measurements that come out of the kiln, is that like to have sort of like a gradation or something of the biomass? Like it is suitable for the side of the road. It is suitable for growing vegetables for your kids or whatever.
Yeah. It's to be able to operate the kiln really efficiently, and
Mm,
so you have all these trade-offs between the speed that you're pulling or pushing material through this kiln, right? The like material flow rate, and the temperature that you're setting it to, and the input of material into this kiln. Um, and as you are trying to optimize all of those different properties, if you try to go too fast, maybe your quality drops off, right? Because the char doesn't get heated enough. And it's very difficult to measure that directly with the technologies that people use right now. So like you have a thermocouple in the side of your reactor, and you just use that as a proxy for how hot your char gets. But like in reality, like some pellet of char that's like, or some chip that's like in the middle of the sample is not going to be at the same temperature as this thermocouple that's sticking into the side of the reactor. But that's what people use, right? And that's I mentioned Hamid Sineh, who does a lot of work on characterizing biochar. He's found that in a lot of cases that the temperature that people report is wildly different from the temperature that the actual sample gets to while it's being processed. And so what we can do then by using electrical conductivity is just directly measure how good is this char as it's coming out of the reactor. And so what temperature did it get to? And being able to do that continuously, right, is kind of what you need to be able to optimize your reactor on the fly as your feedstock is potentially changing, right, as the moisture content, say, is changing as it comes in.
Which I wanted to use that to answer one of the questions, that to remind people that these biochar kilns are self-energized. Yes, there's an initial amount of power that's used. Alan said this, that to get it started, but then it produces enough power or more power than what was actually used to get it started, correct?
Yeah. And that's, there's different designs, right? Biochar reactors go all the way from these very low tech sort of like campfire looking kilns that have absolutely no energy recovery mechanisms whatsoever and no emissions controls, all the way to these, large facilities that are like bioenergy facilities that people have just retrofitted to produce char instead of electricity, right? But they also produce electricity in a lot of cases. So it's, so thermodynamically, it is absolutely true that you get more energy out of this system than you put in, and then it's sort of an engineering set of trade-offs as to how much of that you actually recover.
Gotcha.
What?
Maybe you want to go on, and
Yeah, then let's
we'll come
go
back to
on
other.
to Eli. Hold on a second. Hey, Eli, welcome.
Hey there. Thanks, Dan. Good to meet you, Alan. So a couple of questions related to agricultural uses and benefits of biochar. But first, you mentioned the roadside filter. So I would imagine that you know about this, but for the audience, in tires, there is a chemical that's used as a preservative, which unfortunately, as you drive on a road, the tires, throw off particles, and then those particles can leach this preservative, and it is horribly, horribly, horribly toxic to salmon. It's called 6-ppdq for anybody who wants to look it up. But I'm wondering, your roadside filter, has that been shown to reduce runoff of 6-ppdq into streams?
Yeah, this is an excellent and detailed question that I can look up. I'm less I've personally sort of looked at particular impacts of biochar in wastewater and what's being proven than some of these other areas. But in general, it is absolutely true that biochar is chemically similar to activated carbon, which is used not just like to purify water in general, but as like the basis of producing very high quality drinking water, right? And so what activated carbon does really well, and people are using biochar for in these sort of sides of roads, is it takes many different types of chemicals. And because it has this high surface area, all of these different types of chemicals adsorb, so like sort of attach themselves really easily to the activated carbon.
They want to stick. They want to stick to it.
Exactly. Yeah. So
just like grease wants to stick to everything.
Precisely. Yeah, exactly. And so this is a great way that people filter out things like PFAS, right, through adsorption to activated carbon. I would expect it to work for tire plasticizers. On the particular chemistry, I'd have to look that up.
Okay, so onto agricultural uses of biochar. I dug deep into this a number of years ago, and so first, the difficult to achieve trifecta was reducing the water requirements of crops, increasing yields, and also encouraging more soil organic carbon formation from the root systems and the soil microbiome. So it from what I understand, at least then it was feasible to achieve any two out of those three, but the trifecta was elusive. Is that still the case?
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. I don't necessarily think of those as a trifecta. I think that if you sort of look at these individually, the so biochar can absorb about 6 times its weight in water. And so what that means is that especially if you have like a sandy soil that doesn't do a good job retaining water and you mix in biochar, it can absorb water when it rains, and the water sort of content of that soil is going to be higher. And then if it doesn't rain for a few weeks or maybe a few months, then it'll just stay moister than it would without biochar, right? So it helps that soil hold on to water longer than it would otherwise, and you can really use that to help sort of optimize your sort of water management. I think then the second piece is this connection between biochar and soil nutrients. And like Dan said, the biochar is not a fertilizer per se, right? It's a material that it's organic carbon that goes into soil and can really help a lot of the soil microbiome break down biomass, right? And so this is one of the reasons that one of the best things you can do with biochar is mix it into compost and then use that as a soil amendment, because there's this synergy where the soil microbiome is sort of promoted and sort of made more healthy by the biochar, and then you have all of this organic material that it processes and really helps your crops. So then that's kind of the second piece, the nutrient piece. And then the soil organic carbon, I mean, biochar directly increases soil organic carbon, right? When you mix it into the soil, biochar is carbon, right? It's this
Yeah,
carbon
but it's
material.
recalcitrant organic carbon, as opposed to the biological stuff that is more labile. But at least there were encouraging results, that if you do everything right, you can increase the soil deposition over and above the biochar that you're putting in. It just encourages more soil organic carbon formation. So then the question is, is it now, has it been worked out so that you can really get all three advantages in a practical way?
Yeah. I mean, the again, I sort of take these one at a time more than thinking them as a trifecta with different trade-offs. And one example of that is if you are dry farming in California, right? You're like trying to dry farm vineyards. You are paying a lot of attention to the single thing that matters the most for being able to dry farm is how deep your root system is, because um it just doesn't rain for the entire summer, right? And so having your biochar increase the amount of moisture in the top foot or couple feet of soil isn't going to matter if it doesn't rain for 6 months, right? What you really need is to make your root system go as deep as possible to pull sort of deeper water out of the soil. And biochar can help with that, but it has a lot more to do with depth and the type of application. And as you are transitioning from typical irrigation to dry farming, like what your precise water application profile is, right? You don't want to water frequently for short periods of time. You want to water like once for a long period of time, so water gets super deep in the soil, and that like encourages those roots to go deeper looking for water, right? And so it's really, it has a lot to do with exactly what type of crops you're planting, exactly what the climate is, and sort of how you're managing that system. I think also a lot of, like, totally frankly, industrial agriculture has gotten really, really good at understanding exactly what nutrients different types of plants need, and exactly what nutrients those like soils can provide and what the ROI is going to be if you add nitrogen fertilizer or add different like types of soil amendments, right? And it's like it's very like chemically precise in a way that biochar and regenerative farming and compost like isn't right now. A lot of that has to do again with that variation, and this is part of what we're trying to solve, is that for these end use markets to exist, you need consistent supply at a price point that these markets are actually going to be able to absorb. And so, like, clearly nitrogen fertilizer has that. They can tell you, here's the price for, I mean, it's going up right now, but here's the price of fertilizer. Here's the ROI you expect. Here's like, we do some soil tests. We can tell you exactly how much to add. And biochar, like, because it's been inconsistent in the past, and because the prices are all over the place, right? They go from very low or even negative to like $1,000 a ton. And a typical soil amendment might be something like $60 a ton. Like developing, one of the things that we think we can contribute, especially with control systems that let you produce very consistent, high quality biochar in the field, is just sort of increasing the supply of consistent biochar to allow people to do more precise tests because their soil amendment is more consistent, and that's going to unlock sort of a better understanding of exactly what biochar is going to do in your field.
Okay. So I'd like to come back to another agriculture question after some audience questions.
Yeah. So, Stacy, I have some up here. Actually, let me pull one up here because
yeah, there's so many today.
there's quite a few, but this one I didn't think of. We're making coal essentially from biomass. Can we use that coal, for example, to make steel instead of using fossil coal? Is biochar a replacement for fossil coal in some instances?
Yeah, metallurgical biochar is definitely a thing, and people are sort of increasingly trying to use this. Often, if you think of how it impacts the carbon cycle, the thing that makes biochar a durable removal, obviously, is that like you don't burn it. In metallurgical steel, in some cases, the carbon actually does end up like in the steel, right? And so carbon steel, one of the main ways that you control the properties of steel is you control the carbon content and sort of how those the carbon inclusions are like how large they are and how they're distributed in the steel, and that affects the brittleness and ductility like very, very directly. This is sort of a well-known part of metallurgy. So like a lot of that metallurgical carbon like can be a sink for carbon removal, right? So yeah, I mean, short answer is definitely yes, and this is developing, and that's exactly the sort of application where having a large and durable supply of biochar, or a large and consistent supply of biochar, is really crucial, because people exploring this in their steel plant want to know before they switch over that they're going to be able to get a consistent supply of metallurgical grade biochar.
Yeah, but of course, to the extent that you do burn it and it goes back in the atmosphere, that's being offset by the fact that you didn't dig up some geologic coal and burn it. So
it could be
this is sort of carbon neutral, right? It came out of the atmosphere, it goes back in. Maybe some's left in the steel, which would be cool.
Exactly.
Okay, well, I hadn't thought about that before. That's a really good question. Yeah. So, Stacy, you have another?
Yeah, Thomas, he is in Finland, and they're working on a lot of different applications. And one of the things they're up against is this exact thing of how much does coal you dig out of the ground cost versus the biochar costs to burn. So until we make people pay for their carbon, this is going to be a problem. We have a lot of interest in what is the most bang for your buck in terms of selling biochar? What application?
Yeah. Prices are all over the place, and that is one of the things that's really holding this market back, is that and part of the issue there is that transportation costs are often very high, and large amounts of biochar have typically been produced in centralized facilities, not in these sort of decentralized kilns, right? And so I think building distributed biochar that is capable of producing a consistently high quality product is like really the key to levelizing those prices. But like I said, like we've talked to people who have bought biochar at $1,000 a ton for agriculture, and that's like the delivered price, so that includes transportation. But they do that for a tiny bit of their farm as a test to see how well it works, right? And then if it works well, then they try to figure out, all right, what's some other way that I can get biochar. There are also people paying other people to take their biochar away, right, when it is locally produced in really high quantities. And so an example of that is there's at least one large scale biochar production operation I know of that is like paying landfills to take biochar. It's actually this really interesting use of biochar. It's this, they call it alternative daily cover. So with a landfill, you are you have a cell. You want to reduce the amount of like emissions that come out of your landfill, and the way you do that is you cover it with dirt, and every day you have some cell that you're going to be adding to, and you add to that cell, and then at the end of the day you cover it with more dirt, and this daily cover stuff. If you mix biochar into that dirt, it can help pull things like PFAS and other contaminants out of the landfill leachate, so they just kind of get adsorbed to the surface of the biochar, and it's like a filter that you're sort of adding to your landfill as you build it. And that's great, but landfills will charge you. It's a reduced rate. It's not as much as they would charge you to just throw stuff away, but they will charge you for biochar. And if you have like a lot of production in some location and you have someone else willing to pay you for carbon credits, like maybe the economics work out. But it genuinely does, like, this market is not functioning well, right? Right. It's anywhere from literally like negative cost to very, very high cost. And our thinking is, okay, if you are selling a soil amendment at sort of the price point set for like a premium soil amendment, right? And that's going to be produced in high quantities with sort of appropriate bars for quality. And then you have biochar that you're selling as a cement additive or as metallurgical biochar, or for some of these other like higher performance properties or higher performance applications, right? Maybe that ends up being in the hundreds of dollars a ton, whereas the soil amendment is maybe 100 or a little less a ton. That's how we see these markets sort of ultimately ending up when you are able to produce it in a distributed enough way that you can reduce your transportation costs.
Okay, so I have one, but maybe say, yeah, I have this one and then maybe
Sure.
one more after that.
That was my next one.
Oh, there you go. So
Yeah.
someone's making biochar, but they do it at the kiln takes a long time to cool down before it can be unloaded. Does your system work differently?
Yeah. So ours does. The easiest way to do this is to quench it with water, and that's typically what we do if we're trying to produce large amounts of biochar quickly. We can recover some of that water, so it's not just you're taking char out of a kiln. It's it's more than 500 degrees Celsius. You want to cool that down cool enough that it's not going to immediately burst into flames when it touches air, right? And so you can take some water, spray it on the char. That'll it'll produce steam, right? And maybe you get it down to 200 degrees Celsius, so it's not wet, but it is cool enough that you can handle it, and then you pull it out of the kiln and let it or you pull it out of the processing the chute and let it cool.
So it's a batch process versus a continuous process. You're not just feeding in one end and out coming biochar at the other end. You load it with biomass and then it does its thing.
So what I believe this person is describing is a batch process, that is very typical for some of the sort of less controlled ways of producing biochar, which can be great for if like they're saying, right, if you're in a nature reserve and you have a lot of excess biomass and you don't want to pile burn it, you can bring these kilns sort of out into the woods, and you can make biochar from that, and either quench it if you have water available, or put the fire out and wait a long time for it to cool down, right? And that process kind of works. Our process is continuous, but the quenching itself is a batch process, and so some material will be sort of continuously pulled through the furnace, and it will go into this, the quenching chamber and get quenched and then come out.
Okay, cool, very good. So this is
Well,
one more.
I see. We had a question
There's a lot of
about
questions,
asking.
but we're also
Well,
running out of
yeah, there are
time.
lots of questions. But one immediate I'm noticing as well. Your website, it's so cool with all these videos, but some of the things aren't working when you click on them. They want an email address. Is it like
Oh, yeah.
hello@devonian.ai or something like that?
Team or Alan at devonian.ai.
Team or Alan, ALAN, at devonian.ai. There you go, lightning rod.
There's also a link to Alan's LinkedIn profile in the description, as well as a link to the website.
In the show notes, yeah.
And also, I think your company's Blue Sky as well. And Stacy, you disappeared. But Alan, I want to thank you. It's been fascinating discussion. Who would have thought that biochar is such an amazing...
Oh, wait a minute. Can I just ask, because they want to know, can they buy one of these? Because say
Oh,
they
yeah.
live in the forest, or they have a farm or whatever. Can they get one?
Yeah, we're not selling them yet, but I'd love to talk to them. So yeah, if you can email me at alan@devonian.ai, let's chat.
When do you expect it to be for sale?
Yeah, it's a really good question. What we're doing right now is mainly running them on sites that we control and lease, and having sort of drop-off sites for biomass. We have some partnerships where we're going to be taking our units to those partner sites and sort of integrating with their operations, and the selling them for selling or leasing them for use on totally separate sites is sort of the stage after that.
Right, but to be clear, so are you using them commercially yet, or are they just tests and pilots so far?
Right now, we have a pilot. That 10-ton reactor that we're building right now is going to be the sort of commercial scale.
Commercial.
We are
going to operate, but it still will be a commercial operation at that point.
Yeah, we are approved for issuing credits on Rainbow's registry, and so we're producing small-ish quantities for that, and going to be scaling up in a bit later this year.
Well, very good. Well, thanks for all you're doing there, and thanks for again doing the Stabilize Earth event. And it was again really biochar is, I think it's something most people don't really know much about, but it really is a fascinating subject, and it's interconnected. Cement and steel and agriculture and all kinds of things. And it sounds like it can be, it's not going to eliminate tens of gigatons a year, but it could play a significant role in helping
Big role,
reduce,
yeah, and
reducing
positives.
carbon emissions.
Yeah, and we really think, if you want a carbon removal industry in the middle of the century that does remove tens of gigatons a year, the way, and you think about what is on the table for things that we could do now to get there, right? To give people more confidence that they can buy these really durable credits. We think that in the next few years, biochar is going to have this really outsized impact in just scaling and sort of kicking off that industry. And so that's the role we want to play.
Great. Well, again, thanks so much. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciated the conversation.
Thank you so much. Great talking to you.
Everyone, don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment, and we will see you next time. And thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.